The gnarled branches of ancient pines clawed at the twilight sky, their silhouettes twisted and grotesque against the fading light. A chill wind whipped through the woods, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and something else, something faintly foul, like the breath of a long-dead thing. I pushed deeper into the forest, my boots sinking into the soft, yielding ground. Each step was a battle against the growing darkness, the encroaching shadows that seemed to writhe and coil like living things. My sister Sarah was dying. A rare disease, the doctors had called it, their voices hushed and somber. They spoke of dwindling time, of experimental treatments, of hope that grew thinner with each passing day. But I refused to accept their pronouncements. I would find another way, even if it meant venturing into the heart of darkness itself. The old woman, they called her a witch. Whispers in the shadowed corners of the town, tales told around crackling fires to frighten children. They said she lived in the deepest part of the woods, in a ramshackle hut built from the bones of the earth and the nightmares of men. They said she could heal any ailment, but the price was always steep. I found her hut as the last vestiges of daylight bled from the sky. It was a crooked, hunched thing, half swallowed by the encroaching forest. The windows were dark, empty sockets staring out at me with malevolent intent. A shiver ran down my spine, and I hesitated. Was I truly willing to bargain with the unknown, to risk my own soul for my sister's life? But the thought of Sarah, her pale face and labored breathing, spurred me on. I approached the hut, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The door creaked open as if inviting me into the maw of some monstrous beast. I stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit by a single flickering candle that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the smell of herbs and spices and something else, something ancient and unsettling. Then I saw her. She sat hunched in a rocking chair, her face obscured by the shadows. But I could feel her eyes on me, cold and sharp as shards of ice. "You seek my help," she rasped, her voice like dry leaves skittering across the forest floor. "My sister," I choked out, the word catching in my throat. "She's dying," the old woman chuckled, a dry, brittle sound that sent chills down my spine. "Death comes for us all, child. It is the natural order of things." "But you can stop it," I pleaded. "I know you can." The witch leaned forward, and the candlelight flickered across her face. It was a mask of wrinkles and age, her eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. "I can," she said, her voice a low hiss. "But the price is high." "Anything," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'll do anything." The witch smiled, a slow, predatory grin that revealed a set of yellowed teeth. "Very well," she said. "Bring me the heart of the one who loves you most by Halloween night. Fail and your sister will die, and you will become mine." The candle flame sputtered and died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. A scream caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, my hands outstretched, grasping for anything to hold on to. But there was nothing but emptiness, a suffocating void that pressed in on me from all sides. Then a cold hand clamped down on my arm, its grip like iron. "Don't worry, child," the witch's voice whispered in my ear, sending a wave of icy terror through me. "You have until Halloween, but the clock is ticking." The sound of her laughter echoed in the darkness, a chilling reminder of the bargain I had just struck. I fled the hut, the witch's words ringing in my ears. Outside, the wind howled like a banshee, and the trees swayed and groaned as if in torment. I ran, my lungs burning, my feet pounding the unforgiving earth. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling that I had just made a deal with the devil himself, and that the price would be my soul. The days that followed were a blur of agonizing fear and desperate research. I scoured ancient texts, dusty tomes filled with half-forgotten lore, searching for any mention of the witch, any clue as to how to break her curse. The library, usually a sanctuary of quiet contemplation, became my battleground. The musty scent of old paper mingling with the cold sweat of dread that clung to me. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by nightmares of the witch's cackling laughter and Sarah's fading breaths. Every shadow seemed to hold the old woman's piercing gaze, every creak of the floorboards her shuffling footsteps. I felt her presence everywhere, a suffocating weight pressing down on me, stealing my breath, my sanity. One night, hunched over a particularly ancient volume, I stumbled upon a passage that made my blood run cold. It spoke of the witch's true nature, a creature of unimaginable darkness, feeding on the despair and fear of mortals. It described the horrifying fate that awaited those who failed to fulfill her bargain, their souls trapped in eternal torment, their bodies twisted into grotesque parodies of life. Panic clawed at my throat. I had condemned myself, and worse, I had condemned Sarah. The thought of her suffering, of her soul trapped in that infernal abyss, was unbearable. I had to find a way out, a way to cheat the witch, to break the curse. But how? The answer came in a whisper, a chilling suggestion that slithered into my mind like a venomous snake. If the witch demanded the heart of the one who loved me most, then I would give it to her. But it wouldn't be the heart of a lover, or a friend, or even my own. It would be the heart of the witch herself. The idea was madness, a suicide mission. But as the days dwindled and Halloween loomed closer, it became my only hope. I began to plot, to plan, every waking moment consumed by the terrifying task ahead. I would need a weapon, something powerful enough to pierce the witch's dark magic. And I would need to find her weakness, the chink in her armor that would allow me to strike. The night before Halloween, I ventured back into the woods, armed with a silver knife blessed by the town's oldest priest and a heart filled with a chilling resolve. The forest seemed to press in on me, the darkness alive with unseen eyes and rustling whispers. But this time, fear was a distant echo, overshadowed by the cold fire of determination burning within me. I found the witch's hut bathed in an eerie moonlight, its crooked silhouette casting long, distorted shadows across the clearing. The door creaked open, beckoning me inside. I took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold. The witch sat in her rocking chair, her eyes gleaming in the darkness. "You have returned," she rasped, her voice a grating whisper. "Have you brought me what I desire?" I met her gaze, my voice steady. I reached into my cloak and pulled out the silver knife, its blade glinting in the moonlight. The witch's eyes widened in surprise, a flicker of fear crossing her ancient face. "What is this?" she hissed, her voice laced with suspicion. "Your heart," I said, my voice a low growl. "The price for my sister's life." I lunged forward, the knife raised high. But before I could strike, the witch let out a piercing shriek, a sound that shattered the silence of the night and sent a flock of crows exploding from the trees. The hut seemed to shudder, the walls closing in on me, the shadows twisting and writhing like living things. And then the world dissolved into a swirling vortex of darkness. When I regained consciousness, the first thing I registered was the smell. It wasn't the earthy, herbal scent of the witch's hut. This was something different, sickly sweet, with an underlying metallic tang that made my stomach churn. I opened my eyes to a scene that twisted my insides and sent a wave of nausea surging through me. I was no longer in the hut. Instead, I found myself in a small circular chamber with walls of rough-hewn stone. A single torch flickered in a bracket, casting a dim, flickering light that danced over the grotesque tableau before me. The room was filled with things, twisted, contorted figures that were once human, their bodies fused together in a macabre tapestry of flesh and bone. Limbs protruded at unnatural angles, faces were stretched and distorted, mouths agape in silent screams. Some were still alive, their eyes pleading, their chests heaving with shallow, ragged breaths. Others were long dead, their flesh rotting, their bones picked clean by unseen creatures. The sight was so horrifying, so utterly beyond comprehension that my mind recoiled, trying to shut it out. But the images were burned into my brain, a grotesque slideshow of unimaginable suffering. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, only a dry, choked gasp. Then I saw her. The witch stood in the center of the chamber, her back to me. She was no longer the frail, hunched figure I had encountered in the hut. Now she was tall and imposing, her form radiating an aura of power that made my skin crawl. She was chanting in a language I didn't understand, her voice a guttural rasp that echoed off the stone walls. As I watched, she turned, and my blood ran cold. Her face, once a mask of wrinkles and age, was now smooth and youthful, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. But it was her mouth that held my gaze, twisted into a cruel smile that revealed rows of sharp, pointed teeth. "Welcome, child," she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "To my sanctuary." She gestured towards the grotesque figures surrounding us. "These are the souls who failed to fulfill their bargains. Their bodies are my playthings, their agony, my sustenance." A wave of dizziness washed over me, and I stumbled back, my hand instinctively going to the silver knife hidden beneath my cloak. The witch chuckled, a sound that echoed through the chamber like the tolling of a death knell. "You think that pathetic blade can harm me?" she sneered. "You are a fool, child. You have walked into my trap, and now you will never leave." She raised her hand, and the shadows in the room seemed to gather around her, coalescing into a dark, swirling mass. I felt a surge of terror, a primal fear that threatened to consume me. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the figures, a young woman with her face half melted away, lurched forward, her eyes fixed on the witch. She let out a guttural cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage, and lunged at the witch, her clawed hands reaching for her throat. The witch, caught off guard, stumbled back, the shadows around her dissipating. The other figures, sensing weakness, began to stir, their moans and cries filling the chamber. Chaos erupted. The figures, driven by their pain and fury, attacked the witch, their clawed hands tearing at her flesh, their teeth sinking into her limbs. The witch screamed in fury and pain, her voice echoing through the chamber. I watched in stunned silence as the witch, once so powerful, was overwhelmed by the very creatures she had tormented. This was my chance, my opportunity to escape. But as I turned to flee, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. In the midst of the chaos, I saw Sarah. Her body was twisted and broken, her face contorted in agony. But her eyes, her beautiful blue eyes, were still recognizable, filled with a terror that tore at my soul. I couldn't leave her. I wouldn't. I drew the silver knife and plunged into the fray, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. I fought my way through the grotesque figures, their claws and teeth tearing at my flesh, their screams ringing in my ears. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. I had to reach Sarah. Finally, I reached her, her body limp and lifeless in my arms. I cradled her close, tears streaming down my face. Then I felt it, a cold hand on my shoulder, a grip like iron. The witch's voice, filled with rage and hatred, whispered in my ear. "You will pay for this, child. You will all pay." The darkness wasn't empty. It pulsed with a malevolent energy, a cacophony of whispers and screams that clawed at my mind. I felt myself falling, tumbling through an endless abyss, the witch's laughter echoing all around me. Then, with a jarring thud, I landed on solid ground. Disoriented, I pushed myself up, my hands sinking into something cold and slimy. Panic seized me, and I scrambled back, my eyes frantically searching the darkness. A faint phosphorescent glow emanated from the walls, revealing my surroundings. I was in a cavern, vast and echoing. Towering stalactites dripped from the ceiling, their tips razor-sharp. The floor was slick with moisture, and a strange pulsating fungus grew in patches, casting an eerie light. But it wasn't the cavern itself that filled me with dread. It was the figures that surrounded me. They were the witch's victims, their bodies even more grotesquely contorted than those in the chamber above. Some were fused to the walls, their limbs stretched and twisted, their faces frozen in eternal screams. Others crawled across the floor, their bodies mangled and broken, their eyes burning with a malevolent hunger. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. They lurched towards me, their hands reaching, their voices a chorus of moans and gurgles. I turned to flee, but the way was blocked by a towering figure, its form shrouded in shadow. As it stepped forward, the light from the glowing fungus revealed its horrifying visage. It was the witch, but transformed. Her body was swollen and grotesque, her skin stretched taut over bulging muscles. Her eyes burned with an infernal fire, and her mouth was a gaping maw filled with razor-sharp teeth. "There is no escape, child," she boomed, her voice echoing through the cavern. "This is my domain, the realm of eternal suffering, and now you are mine." She lunged at me, her claws outstretched. I screamed and raised my arms to shield myself, but it was futile. Her strength was inhuman, her grip like iron. She lifted me off the ground, her face inches from mine, her breath hot and fetid. "You dared to defy me," she snarled, her voice dripping with venom. "You dared to try and kill me. Now you will suffer for eternity." She opened her jaws wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end, but it didn't come. Instead, I heard a shriek, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. I opened my eyes to see a figure standing between me and the witch. It was Sarah, but she was no longer the frail, dying girl I knew. Her body was whole and strong, her eyes blazing with a fierce light. She raised her hand and a bolt of pure energy shot out, striking the witch in the chest. The witch roared in pain and stumbled back. Sarah pressed her attack, her hands unleashing a torrent of energy that sent the witch reeling. The other figures in the cavern cowered back, their moans turning to whimpers. I watched in stunned disbelief as Sarah, my sweet, gentle sister, battled the monstrous witch. Where had this power come from? How had she become so strong? Then I remembered the witch's words, "Fail and your sister will die, and you will become mine." The witch hadn't just meant that Sarah would die. She meant that Sarah would become like her, a creature of darkness, feeding on the suffering of others. But somehow Sarah had resisted, had turned the witch's own power against her. The battle raged, the cavern filled with the sounds of their struggle. Sarah was relentless, her attacks growing fiercer with every passing moment. The witch, weakened and wounded, began to falter. Finally, with a final, desperate cry, Sarah unleashed a blast of energy that engulfed the witch. The cavern shook, and the air crackled with power. Then silence. The witch's body lay crumpled on the ground, her form slowly dissolving into dust. The other figures in the cavern began to fade, their screams dying away into nothingness. Sarah turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "It's over," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We're free." I rushed to her, tears streaming down my face. We clung to each other, the horrors of the past few days fading into a distant nightmare. We were alive. We were together, and we were free. But as we made our way out of the cavern, a chilling thought struck me. The witch's final words echoed in my mind. "You will all pay." What did she mean? Was this truly the end? Or was this just the beginning of another nightmare? We emerged from the forest into the cool, crisp air of dawn. The sky was awash with the soft hues of sunrise, painting the world in a palette of hope and renewal. It felt like a lifetime ago that I had first entered those woods, driven by desperation and fear. Now, walking beside my sister, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in weeks. Sarah, though free from the witch's curse, was different. There was a newfound strength in her eyes, a quiet confidence that replaced her former fragility. She no longer looked like a victim, but a survivor. And I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that the darkness within her was not malevolent, but a source of power, a shield against the evils of the world. We returned to town, to our small, familiar house with its peeling paint and overgrown garden. It felt like coming home after a long, terrifying journey. We didn't speak of the horrors we had endured, the memories too raw, too painful. Instead, we focused on the present, on the simple joy of being together, of being alive. The days that followed were a balm to our wounded souls. We spent our time gardening, reading, and simply enjoying each other's company. The townsfolk, initially wary of Sarah's newfound strength, gradually warmed to her, their fear replaced by a grudging respect. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah turned to me, her eyes filled with a question I had been dreading. "What about the witch's last words?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What did she mean? You will all pay?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation I knew we had to have. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think she meant that the darkness she represented, the evil in the world, it's not gone. It's still out there." Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But we're not afraid," she said, her voice firm. "We faced the darkness and we survived. We're stronger now." She was right. We had faced the unimaginable, and we had emerged victorious. We were no longer just sisters, but warriors, guardians against the shadows that lurked in the corners of the world. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land, I knew that we were ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead together. The witch's bargain had brought us to the brink of despair, but it had also forged a bond between us, a strength that could never be broken. We had paid a terrible price, but we had also gained something precious, the knowledge that even in the face of unimaginable horror, love and courage could prevail. And that in the end was a happy ending indeed.